Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Ripley Rawlings, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Rip is a retired veteran who writes books like The Killbox, and he does the action adventure thriller novel thing. And, we love these guys on the show. It's always fun. I always want to support fellow veterans, especially veterans who create. And so I thought, look, there's a lot going on in the news right now, and I don't want to get too deep Afghanistan, but do you have any thoughts just to open this thing up with in terms of, I don't know, what the heck do we just do?
Yeah, so I've had an opportunity to serve at the Pentagon, and that was the highest level I really served. The majority of my time in the Marine Corps was at the tactical and the operational level, so that's kind of the low level and mid level of conflict. But at the Pentagon, by virtue of just where you are, you're in the strategic realm on a daily basis. And so I had an opportunity to see all our war plans, and some of that included stuff that we're dealing with right now, obviously very classified still. But the trouble that I have with what we're doing now is that we had a peace dividend. Since about 2015, we've done a great job at keeping the Taliban at bay. We've used about 5,000 Marines, soldiers, sailors, airmen to do it. So it's an economy of force, or it was. And our nation was doing a pretty good job. And then all of a sudden, things collapsed. And I think they collapsed less due to the right plans. In fact, in preparation for this, I kind of pulled out a lot of my old stuff. So I've got, John Nagel, Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife, which we all had to read in the service. Here's my Afghan TTP manual. Here's how to find explosives in the desert. But what was, I think, probably of most interest to your viewers is this is the SSQ. This is Strategic Studies Quarterly. This is 2018. But as early as 2006 and 7, we were writing, how do we get out of Afghanistan gracefully? So the military's been studying this for a long time. We put in a lot of plans, layers of good plans. This issue talks about transformation in the war in Afghanistan. It really talks about, hey, with a soft presence, that's special operating forces, and with a robust ability to provide close air support, we can keep the Taliban at bay. And perhaps that's enough to ensure that once we do withdraw, we'll have a government that doesn't collapse immediately. What we've seen instead is the exact opposite. It's been incendiary. I would hazard a guess that the majority of the military plans that were in place were ignored. I think I've seen it from my perspective. I was with a group called FAST, Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team. And what we tended to notice is that we would provide 3 plans to our leadership on how to reinforce things or how to retrograde, because pulling people out of an embassy was one of our roles. And it was always kind of a heavy, a medium, and a light option. And our diplomats typically chose the light option because to them, less boots on the ground was less of a political in. They didn't have to ante up. There was less risk. Obviously, to us military guys, the heavy option was always the one we wanted. It's like, this is what I need to take care of the job. And if you strip forces from me, I can't do it. So I don't know. My phone and email and text have been blowing up for the past 2 weeks since even before this event happened. And it's been a lot of outrage, a lot of veterans very angry because we know why this happened. And it wasn't due to military malfeasance necessarily. It was due to, I think, kind of a muddling of what it is that we needed to have happen. Now, when you transfer power from one president to the next, it's a vulnerable point. It's a weak point. In the military, we call it a seam. And that's really what's happened, is that the Taliban took advantage of it. There's a lot of kind of no-brainers for anyone in your audience who just has no military background or acumen. I would ask them a simple question: what comes out first, soldiers, sailors, Marines, or civilians? And the answer is civilians. It's not very hard to figure that out. You don't have to have a degree in planning, as I do, to kind of figure some of that stuff out. So that one was done in error. I think there's some other very simple questions you can ask, which is, when you're planning a retrograde, trying to get your people first, you have to know where they all are and who they are. That's a Department of State responsibility.
What?
Yeah. Believe it or not. And, the last one is there really is a fighting season. I think this is a little harder for a lot of Americans to understand, but in Afghanistan, it's bitter cold in the winter, enough that if you don't have the modern equipment that we do in our military, as we used to teach in our military schools, the mountains and the cold become another army. So if you're fighting the Americans and you're the Taliban, from about November, December, January timeframe, you're in a phase where you're fighting a third army all the time, constantly, and that's the cold. So, yeah, we could have withdrawn during that period. We wouldn't have seen the collapse. It would have been at least slowed. I mean, the cold slows a lot of things, and certainly would have slowed the Taliban's advance. So, what are we seeing wrong? A lot of stuff. What should your viewers take away from it? This was a bad mix-up. Really bad. I mean, a mix-up doesn't even do it justice. And in my personal opinion, the military leaders in charge, when we're done with the evacuation and we've got all our citizens back, which I'm not sure we're going to make this 31st deadline, but, fingers crossed, they need to step down. They need to, they wouldn't have tolerated anything even close to this from us as junior officers. And so I think we need to see some of the top 3 folks in charge of this debacle head home afterwards. And, if they do, it'll give faith back or restore faith back to the military. But at the very least, from the military perspective, and I can speak from that tone because I've watched buddies get fired for less than this. And, frankly, a lot of this stuff is court-martial offense. This is the kind of stuff that we court-martial people for because there are lives at stake and there's lives lost. There's international dignity at stake, which is a forecast of what our military and our government's going to be in the future. So, yeah, I don't know. We go on endlessly, but, like I said, a lot of angry vets.
A lot of angry vets. And the thing is no matter how you shake it, and there is no political thing, we know how to exfil better than we did. And the Taliban doesn't necessarily have that much of a say. They weren't in charge. We were in charge. The Afghan government was in charge. And when they're like, well, you guys are going to leave in this state to have anyone, the president of our country, well, the last guy made a deal and I just can't break that deal after all the undermining of Donald Trump's presidency. I mean, come on, this is an easy rewrite. Like, hey, we're going to take our time on this. And you're 100% right. People can't even fathom how cold it is and how much our army struggles, our military struggles to survive that cold season. We can still go out, but it's a lot of times like we wanted to fight through the fighting season, but you're not fighting a ghost. So you're out there trying to fight and that won't show up because they went to ground. They're hiding out and stay warm and survive. And so we would go and be like, see, there's no Taliban here, but that's just wintertime. Like it's just so impossibly cold. The other thing I would say is in general, we are bad at the transition ourselves, right? So as a military, like if you were running a regiment and you were going to pull out of that area, the transition, it's really not strong doctrine out of transition, that partnership, that governance partnership back to the Afghans, back to the Iraqis, back to the Africans, whoever you're talking to, we're not strong. We think we are, but then you start to examine it and like, look at a fire team and they weren't performing up to standard. You could take Gunny and be like, fix that. And he would have drills and he could do all this that team up to the standard. Marines that can't hit an 800-meter target with their rifle. Well, we know how to fix that. We do not do that with partnering. We do not treat that the same way. We don't, when we rip, and the reason I say this rip is that when we rip that trans, we think we've done a good job. We never, ever, ever go back and talk to that person and go, how'd that go? We never interact with that partner again in that partnership, right? Because we leave and we go somewhere else. We do a totally different job the next time we're back in Afghanistan if we're back there. And as a guy that stayed and saw those things, they're horrible. They're completely erratic and chaotic, and they don't go the way we want them to go. So when we're leaving, one of the things I would often get to do is I get to go to that partner and say, hey, we're really leaving this. About 6 weeks, be 6 months. I can't say exactly when because you never know, but we're leaving. And then you see the panic on their face. They'd be like, oh my God, you really leave? Like, I'm not lying to you. You may not see me again. You may see me 5 more times, but you're not going to see me 20. And then when it'll end into that, so what do you need to survive? And the things they need are really basic. I need a generator.
Yeah.
I can't do this without a generator. I need my budget. I haven't had my budget. So when when the folks are like, we think they'll hold out, they'll be fine. I'm telling those guys are like, I got to get my deal cut with the Taliban right now because I am not going to survive. The resources I need to earn anything.
I mean,
so because up,
the big,
and instant change. Yeah.
No, I was going to add on to what you're saying, which is the biggest thing that they need is to have kind of, Mother Marine and the big green machine behind him. I mean, part of it is, here's a question that's posed to me often. So I've been asked a lot, should we get out of Afghanistan? So since I started deploying there, I've been asked that question. And the question is always, we're not, this is not the intent of the mission. The missions that we've been prescribed are not to stay in there forever. But my quick response is how long do we stay in Japan? How long do we stay in South Korea? How long do we stay in Germany? And the answer is very flat-footed for people, which is we're still there.
Right.
How long does it take to underscore or undergird our successes? And, the answer is 20, 30 years. How long does it take to change people's minds? 20 or 30 years. So, what I would say on that, though, is that 5,000 troops, or, been about 5,650 since 2015. And then you include in that the civilian contracting base, which is servicing their aircraft and teaching them how to, maintain their equipment that's been purchased by us. That's about another 6,000. So you've got about 11,000, almost 12,000 total on deck. If you look at our footprint across Germany and across South Korea, it's more than double that. So obviously that's a different mission set. But to what you were saying, we're very critical of ourselves. As Americans, we love to win. We think that we're going to win every time. And every time we get involved in a conflict like this, we tend to forget that, there were other wars before before Vietnam. And although that obviously was a terrible way to pull out, we've had tremendous successes in different varieties. Typically, what we do is we want to get out and we don't want to sit around in places. And we forget that we do stick around other places that have kind of a higher security profile. So I was kind of resigned to the fact that how bad would it be if we were rotating forces there about 5,000 for the next 20 years? I don't think it would have been bad. I enjoyed tours like that. I mean, my tour to Okinawa, my tours across Europe. I was a strategic planner in Germany. So I think my thoughts on it are the troops don't mind it. We love continuing to reinforce that success. I've worked in Japan. I've worked in South Korea. And all of those were, in my mind, were noble missions because we had an able partner by that point. South Korea looked a lot like Afghanistan did back in the day. If you looked at the Koreans and the Chinese invading all the way down to the Pusan Pocket, Korea there wasn't anything left. It was like the Taliban overrunning the entire country in the sense that they left nothing but mutilation behind them. And when we attacked back north, we found, a country that was destitute. But the point is, I think we could have done it. It's that opportunity's passed. Now we need to get everybody out. And I mean, my opinion is it doesn't matter who you are. If you helped us build a bridge, if you worked on a base, if you just want to get away from tyranny, by God, give us your huddled masses. We'll take them. My grandparents on my mom's side fled from Europe. They saw what looked like a tyrannical system coming their way. And they said, let's get out of here because this is no good. And they produced this, people are always worried, well, what are these people going to do when they get over here? My grandparents never thought they were going to produce a Marine that served 23 years, but here I am. I like to think I've given back to the nation. So my grandfather worked at the Ford Motor Company and built Ford cars and, worked his way up to middle management and loved everything he did. And who are they going to be? Us, I mean, that's my perspective.
Yeah. I'm all about that. And plus, every night and as I hear about, I should watch things, but I hear constantly there are no people taking these low end jobs. Well, guess what immigrants are going to do? They're going to go out and work, and they're not above any jobs. So they'll go take a job. They'll outwork their peers. They'll buy a company, or they'll, do whatever, and then they'll make sure their kids get educated. I mean, we've got a long history of getting immigrants through the process, and it's all hard. And we could do it, but really, 2 generations later, you don't recognize like the people as immigrants. Now you recognize them as a family of Americans. We're good at that.
Well, I mean, so there have been some good stories amid all the chaos and the Sturm und Drang, if you will. one of them is the all-female robotics team was evacuated. There was a woman who put a lot of pressure and a lot of money together. I think she was independently wealthy, and she rescued all 11 of these gals. They're college educated. They're obviously very intelligent young ladies who will be repressed immediately when the Taliban comes in there. Those ladies, I hope to gosh, come over here and say, can we continue our education in the United States? And we say, you're damn straight. And they invent the next robot dog that helps us kick some butt downrange. Whatever. Those are the people. That intellectual capital is not something to be squandered. I think that's all of those folks who want to come over ought to get an opportunity if they raise their hand and say, because they're going to get pillaged. I mean, the most disheartening story I've read so far, that's the positive, and I hate to go right to a negative. I know we're going to talk about books here in a minute, but there was in Kabul, before the Taliban had even made it, in the days preceding the rapid advance that they made in the last days, all the burqa salesmen were out of stock. And if you think about that, that means that there are, legions of women. This is not necessarily their husbands forcing them to go buy them. This is ladies who've resigned themselves to the fact that they're now going to be chattel slaves as soon as the Taliban show up. And so they're made the mental leap to say, I better go buy a burqa or I'm going to get shot or beaten in the street. I mean, that's terrible subjugation. This is medieval type stuff. And, from my perspective, let's get them out. Let's get anybody who's raised a hand. I was sad to see everybody raising these little certificates that we gave all of our contractors or support contractors downrange. These are Afghan citizens that have a little certificate that says, thanks for helping us build a bridge in your network in your area. To them, it's a green card. To the Taliban, it's a death notice. They're going to use those and kill them. And right now, unfortunately, we're going to see all of neighbors turning in all the bad that humanity can be. The stuff that we saw in Germany when it was taken over, the stuff we saw in Japan where neighbors turn on neighbors, brothers on brothers. It's not just a civil war. Secret police are going to be out in the hinterlands coming for anybody who, has a blue finger from voting, for instance. So let's get everybody out. They're going to make absolutely fantastic citizens of the world. And of course, they're going to look at everything we've done and be thankful for the fact that the United States has tried to do what's right, even in the face of so much wrong.
Yeah, I like that approach. And there's going to be human atrocity along the way with this. And we just have to accept that. This is the part of our problem is as a nation, we pick our human atrocity that we can't get over.
Right.
Take offense to and have to do something about. But it's guys like us that have to go do something about it.
Right.
There's the occasional NGO and everything.
Thank God
Syria
for
goes bad. Yeah.
So.
Well, when Syria goes bad, when Libya goes bad, we just can't do it. We have to accept that the world is so ground into the ground because of it.
I think it's hard for the U.S. to accept a lot of that ill in the world. And that's one of the things that makes us a good country is that, we've got enough freedom to go around and we believe that we ought to help. I mean, there's a very large percentage of our country that doesn't, that believes in kind of being insular and, letting things happen globally that we could prevent, not necessarily getting bogged down in a quagmire, which you're suggesting. Obviously, I don't agree that we should fight everyone else's wars. And that's what you're saying. But I do agree that we have a duty as a very wealthy nation to support people that try to gain freedom and independence from tyranny. I mean, I live in Virginia, and the motto of the state is Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always a tyrant. So that was a very important slogan for two very important, three if you include 1812. That was our revolution. That was the later fight against the Brits again in 1812, and that was the Civil War. Those are very seminal events to our history where we reaffirmed that freedom is something that we really believe in. I have an Afghan war rug behind me. So, we bought, obviously all the troops bring home stuff. I've got, all sorts of stuff up on my walls, as you can see. RPG, not real, by the way. But I've got all sorts of kind of detritus from war that I've picked from here and there. Some of them I'm very proud of. This bayonet is from Iraq, from a guy who didn't need it anymore. We'll leave it at that. And he needed to go away. But this rug over here, if you can read it, it says, long live U.S. soldiers. And up on the top, it says, Afghans liberated from terrorists. So these are made by moms kind of in the hinterlands. They're made by moms in order to usually benefit their, sonny who's going to go off to war and fight the Taliban. In the case of these rugs, we saw the opposite. There's a very popular rugs that are sold online these days that include stuff that say, go away Soviet Union. So, it's not as though Afghanistan hasn't had its share of conflict. It's in a nexus between some very important countries. It's always been a trade route. I have another book series that I'm pitching, so this might be a good segue, but I have another book series that I'm pitching where there are these nexes across the world that are vital that people don't know. And it's a landscape of terrain. It's a mix of, water features or bodies of water, and then not just kind of local conflict, but global conflict that happens on a local scale because those places are nexes and they're very interesting to study. There aren't many guys who kind of make it too far in the military, at least as officers, that don't study this stuff. And so, I made a profession. I was sent off to we call it the Jedi Night School. I sound like I'm trying to pat myself on the back, but I don't know how I snuck into this thing, but we picked some of our smartest dudes and we sent them to a group called SAW, the School of Advanced Warfighting. And you have to really study. I think we ended up reading 40,000 pages while we're there. You end up typing over 10,000 pages. So, it's one of these things where, and they give you a master's degree when you're done. And then they say, go plan shit for us. We educated you a little bit, you know some stuff now. You've read all these books, that I got behind me here. This cigar chewing Curtis LeMay. I like having these guys up here. There's Napoleon, LeMay, and Churchill, three of my favorites. And, they're props right now. They're kind of holding up the big weapon system you see back there. But at one point, I filled my brains with all that good knowledge from those guys. And you realize that a lot of this has been done before. And so it's important to study military. The military is great to study military history. We make
You were right about that. It's all been done before, but let's get into the book stuff.
Let's go to book stuff.
That's why you're here, right? You're an author. Yeah.
I'm retired after all this. But by the way, I wrote a book, right?
Yeah. And look, here it is, Killbox. Let me put the link up here. If you guys are on the podcast side, just look in the show notes and you'll see that. But there's the Killbox book. You go to riprawlings.com. You can buy it there. I can put the Amazon link in a little later on. The point here is, if you like these, these action books, fantastic ones. When I was going through this, I'm like, this is on the money. You're telling a great story. You know what you're doing. You've done it. So you're getting a point of view of someone and this is one of my favorite things because we've had Jack Carr on. We've had Andrews and Wilson on.
Yeah. These
guys are actual veterans. They've actually done this. And so when you get the books, it's such a great time. God bless Tom Clancy for really taking this genre and really exploding. But the Navy's writing it. Fast Company, Marine commander type guy, writing these things. You guys really think about what it's going to be like. If it gets worse, you know what that looks like. Let's talk about the boots on the ground and kind of sensibility that an author like you brings to this genre.
Oh, you're nice to say it. I eagerly await all of those guys you just mentioned, when their novel release. Mark Greaney is kind of a mentor of mine. Not just, he is a mentor of mine, not just kind of. He and I wrote a book together called Red Metal, which is this book over here, which was, our attempt at kind of a Clancy-esque thriller. Of course, he's more than Clancy-esque. He was Clancy for about 8 books, and he wrote Tom Clancy novels, under that whole book series, the Jack Ryan series. But he's been a fantastic mentor to me to kind of help me get jump-started into the markets. It's difficult to do. It's not easy. Jack Carr, as you mentioned before, fantastic author. I look, if you've read any of the Jason Bourne series lately, those are, that's authored by a friend of mine named Josh, he was an Army staff sergeant, Josh Hood, and he's, been there and done that. And so reading these guys to me is it's a lot of fun because I think they think similar to me and vice versa. So you are getting a lot of authenticity. I was asked once before, where do you get some of the dialogue? Your dialogue is very fluid. And I said, well, partly it's from just being a people studier. Part of your job in the military is a leader, because the highest privilege I had to lead was a battalion. So that's 1,200 18-year-olds that, gosh, if you want to see kids get in trouble, every weekend I would get phone calls from the local sheriff and deputies, and hey, we got 6 of you guys for fighting with surfers. If you get down here in an hour, we won't book them. You guys can kick their ass when you get them home, which we usually did. But
Yeah.
If you've done that, as all the authors that you mentioned have, then you've heard colonels talk to corporals and sergeants to admirals. And so, you kind of, the makeup or the panoply of kind of human interaction has been played out in front of you. And so it makes it a lot more exciting to write about it, because you're like, well, a little bit of fiendishness also, but especially if you planned operations, like, what am I going to put my main character into today? How is he going to get his butt kicked by something that people are really going to get into and get excited about it? So that the kill box is just that. Our adventurers have gone a step further.
It's funny that conversation, we all hear things, and I have them, because in my job as a counterintelligence agent, collector, I need to understand the human condition. And so whenever I hear something interesting, I save it. So this is just a quick story, but I know you'll get this. So we're jumping from one location in Baghdad to the other. Entire battalion is moving, and it's a deployed battalion is way bigger because you got your civilians and all these people are moving. And so we get there, and the civil affairs commander, he's for the audience, he's a major, but he's a new major, so he's young. So he knows better, but he doesn't know better. And he comes up to the operations sergeant major, and he's like, "Oh, sergeant major, I need some bodies. I need some extra help. We got to finish this move, and we're working till 3 a.m. every morning. We just don't have the time to get this move completed." And the sergeant major's eating nuts, spits a nut out. Why don't you move at 3:10 a.m.? And the guy's like, "What? What?
We can do that."
we have to just keep working. He's like, Sergeant Major is so awesome. He's like, I don't got bodies to give you. I'm not going to give them so you guys can have them unpack.
Work harder. Yeah.
If your day ends at 3 a.m., start moving at 3:10. He gave him a break.
Get the job done. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that military members end up making pretty good authors, is that you have this kind of stick-to-itiveness and this we can get it done posture. Your whole military career revolves around you being able to resolve problems and solve issues for your subordinates as much as you do for your superiors. So trying to figure out how to write a novel, I mean that's the easy part. It becomes a lot of fun because you're breathing life into these characters. The logistics part is a little harder, which is, well, how do I get published? So that's a whole other ball of wax. But I've had a lot of buddies who have left the service and have asked how to get into writing. And the only thing I've always told everybody is it's a lot harder than it looks. I mean, if you have a novel that comes out and it's pretty good, then, people think it was easy. More often than not, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not a straight laced as I'm going to sit down and put pen to paper and all of a sudden some really cool words are going to come out on the page. My best chapters are ones that I revised 20, 25 times, where I had to scrub it and take it out. And so, that does make it a lot more difficult on you, but you want the words to sound good and you want people to enjoy a good story. And that's really what it's all about. Mark Greaney told me once, he said, look, I've encountered military members who are terrible at writing. And he told a couple stories, which I'll paraphrase one right now. He said, there was a gentleman who really wanted to write a book and kind of sent a manuscript over to Mark. By the way, don't do that. He gets 300 manuscripts a week from people asking to look at it. And he's trying to write his own books, trying not to bug the poor guy. But and he produces fantastic novels. So don't bug him by all means. Otherwise, we'll get in his flow. But he said there was this guy, and he had maybe it was just kind of the brain or mindset where he had to explain every military technical detail, and he had to use every acronym he'd used in the service. Well, I like to kind of drip and drab a couple in there so that people know this is a military thriller. There's going to be some shoot 'em ups and there's going to be some romance and that kind of stuff. So you'll enjoy it. But, we're going to throw in some military stuff like it for real. But if you really actually have your guys talk like we do over the radio, if you really have them kind of go through by the numbers what their day is like, I mean, most folks are going to be bored to death, and they're going to be over acronymed, and they're going to put the book down.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we've all done this when you sit in staff meeting because you get bored. Not always stuff you need to listen to, but I'll invent whole paragraphs of just absolute gibberish that I could say to you and you would get it in a second, you know, and you're right. We love to get corrective in our language. Like you said earlier, you know, 3 courses of action. And no 3 distinct courses of action. That's how, and then the commander picks one or whatever. All that stuff. Nobody cares. Nobody cares that we consider these 3 options and you know, you're staffing these things. And what the best answer is. Nobody cares. And they don't care that it's called ops or coup ops and all that stuff. Nobody cares about that. You have to sprinkle it in. You're totally right about this. Just enough. What I wanted to say is, from talking to a lot of you guys, is you're right. Writing the book is the fun part. And it's not like, oh man, how do you get that done? The hard part is I don't know, fighting with the publisher to get them to print another series and bang it, right? Like that. Or 5th fact, nailed them to believe in your book. That is, by the way, selling like hot cakes. And I'm like, yeah, it's about to stop. We don't want to get stuck with those books. So you have to fight that. You have to fight with your agent. You have to be salesperson of the year. Your book every single time. You know, like that. All of that is the stuff you don't get into right away.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It's you. The writing bug hit me a long time ago, and you know, in a lot of ways, the question I pose myself is, why did you become a Marine, and why didn't you become an author first? I had degrees in English literature and German literature in college, and so certainly I had the writing and reading bug. I mean, I started my first year in college as a physicist, and I finished the first year doing all the core science requirements. And you know, you have all this stuff that you got to take in college your first year, and I looked back at my grades, and it was like physics D, physics lab D minus. Chemistry, C, chemistry lab, C, you know, and then it was like, you know, all the humanities, history of Western civilizations, A plus, English literature, A plus. I had to take a theater class, theater, A plus, you know, even history of naval, Navy history of naval sciences was A plus. So all the humanities I was breezing through, you know, without really trying. All I was doing was enjoying the subject and kind of responding to the teacher and writing papers. Science, I'm beating my head against the wall and trying to get a decent grade. And I realized at the end of the year when I looked at it, I'm like, geez, you know, maybe this is a sign to tell me something. So I immediately switched and ended up with 2 majors and a minor degree, just because I had, you know, enough in me to go out and do it. So I, you know, for me, it was always the question. My parents and everybody, my relatives always said, why did you become a Marine and not a writer? And it's like, well, I wanted to serve. I wanted to give something back. And now that hopefully colors my writing experience enough that it makes it entertaining and exciting for people.
Yeah, I know. And I think that plan works out. And some of my advice, every year I go back to my high school and I talk to the students there, especially seniors. And I tell them, if you're going to go to school, follow the A's. You know, where you get A's, that's likely where you want to put, because at some point, the field you're in, that mountain narrows, it gets a little harder to get those A's. And if you're still getting A's, you're still climbing to the top of the mountain. Even if the degree is, it's not a typical degree or whatever, but if you're getting good grades and you have a knack for this thing, continue to knack it out.
Yeah.
Right. You can will your way through a mathematics degree, but you know, you don't want to have to will your way through your entire professional life. You want to at some point.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. Well, you know, so it's interesting. I have a friend of mine who will remain nameless just because I don't know if this story was intended to be private, but he had a great analogy. So I'm sure you'll have viewers that are like, well, okay, with all that said, how do you get published? So kind of the answer to that, if you will, is this through an anecdote. A friend of mine who's a very accomplished author. He's excellent at what he does. He and writes great books and is a very high acclaim. And it's not Mark Greaney, just so that my closest association isn't offended. But he had a file on his desktop on his computer called Rejections, and it had 73 scanned in or emailed rejection letters that he'd received over about a year it took him to send his manuscript around. When he hit 73, being that he's a tough guy, he started back at 1 again to see if maybe they'd forgotten him. And sure enough, around number 16, they said, "Hey, this is a great book. We'll take it." So, part of it's persistence. I've experienced rejection in the writing world, and it's awful. It's terrible. And you have a great what you believe is a great manuscript, and you send it around, and you're hoping somebody's going to be interested in the story. And frankly, they get my editor at Kensington. I think he manages 300 books a year. So if you think about that, that's a huge amount of books to read through. And he's a busy guy. My editor at Penguin for the Red Metal series, I think rejects about 100 a week. If I'm getting the numbers wrong, he'll forgive me. But Tom Colgan spends a lot of time looking over manuscripts. He's very diligent about it. And he looks to see, obviously he's got a weather eye because he's been doing it for 25 plus years. But he looks to see what he thinks is going to sell in the current market. And, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I mean, I've read other people's manuscripts. As a fairly junior author myself, I have a lot of close acquaintances who are very interested in writing, and they send stuff to me and say, "Can you look at it?" I'm not going to turn them down. These are buddies and acquaintances of mine who are kind of with me at the ground floor of, knock on wood that there's more than one floor to what I'm doing here so far. Right? So far, it's going well. But so I owe it to them to take a look at it. And they've got great writing. And I think, gosh, the best advice I can give them is what I just gave, which is, this is good. Make sure you just, when you hit number 73, start back at 1 again and keep submitting.
Yeah, that we got to do that, because this industry does tolerate a lot of sameness. There's some level of it, but there's some guy who's better at sameness than you are. And the author who thinks that their idea is original isn't realizing that the publisher reads all of those books. And so
right.
What you think is original, they probably read it 100 times. And so being original, cut it. They're going to your book and be like, your book is like this book and this book and this book. So already seen it, already know what that does, No,
you're hitting it on the head. That was something that's been given to me as advice from editors, which is, you have to be different enough than the next guy. Because otherwise it's all done. I had what I thought was a really superior, this is terrible to admit, but I have about 64 books started or in some form. About 10 of them are actually almost completed manuscripts on my computer. And so I submitted what I thought was one of the top ideas to a publisher. And the publisher said, "This sounds familiar." I was like, "Well, how's that?" He said, "Well, go read, in this case, Clive Cussler, the Oregon Files." And I read Clive Cussler when I was a kid. Self-admission, I hadn't read any Clive in the meanwhile. I've been reading maybe too many military manuals, but he's one of my favorites, or was. And so I went back and took a look at the Oregon Files. I'm like, I didn't read the Oregon Files, but I went back and looked at it, and I was like, yeah. So, finding an original idea is hard. It's not easy. You might think it's original, but your editors or some editor is going to tell you, yeah, it's not original enough. But if you find a good agent, that's kind of the key. They'll sit down with you and go, okay, change this character. I mean, in some cases, it might be stuff that you don't want to hear, some tough love, like, let's make this male, jocked up recon guy a female. And you'd be like, wait, what? I can't do that, right, from a female perspective. But, listen to your agent. If you got a good one, then he's going to steer you clear. I've got one of the best agents in New York. One of the best. He's in the top 3. If he's tuning in, he'll be like, it's the top 1, Rip. But he's definitely he's definitely credited in the top 3 of all of the kind of thriller fiction. I'll put it that way. So I think I lucked out a lot, and as part of the spiel is that you got to have a little bit of luck also. So hopefully the luck continues. And this book, I put a lot of heart and soul into it. So the Kill Box if I could say it myself, it's a good book. There's a really brutal antagonist who is intended to really get people ticked off. My wife, I've had a lot of beta readers. My wife is one of them. you got to get your spouse involved. And, all my beta readers, because I had 6 beta readers go through. And beta readers, if you don't know what they are, they're people who read kind of what you consider to be your last manuscript. For me, it was about version number 24 or 25. So it was ready to, it was, a month away to a little bit more than that to submit to the editor for his review. And down to the last man and woman, they said, I hope that this antagonist, midstream, because I get a lot of emails and texts, midstream, they're like, I hope this antagonist dies because this person sucks. I was like, well, good. If you hate my antagonist, then, it's a better book.
I love it. Yeah. The beta reader thing, the idea, and this I know you know that the publisher, the editor, and the agent are the things that you don't necessarily want to hear. Your ego doesn't want to hear.
Right.
But your businessman side, the fact that if they put a book pulled together, it doesn't matter if you've written the greatest book of all time. If your proposal sucks, you are not going to get. It'd be really hard to find someone to publish a book and how good it is, because that proposal has a business plan. Have you done your research? You're new to how many books do you think we're going to sell? Because we don't need this book. We say no 100 times a day. You know, to every have bird dogging books. They also they say, that business proposal for that book is it's so important, and you realize that getting into it. You just think you can put 300 words of mastery together, but that ain't gonna cut it.
You know, there's a ton of resources out there. I'm an avid reader of. In fact, I'm looking over at I've got. You're kind of missing what you're seeing here is a lot of war stuff, and well, the rest of my office is even more war stuff. But there are some bookshelves in here that are kind of stacked full, and I've got a lot of kind of on writing or how to write stuff. And even though I had the degree in English Lit and the degree in German Lit, you know, you find yourself, especially post, you know, my first career, which is military, saying, well, what are some better ways to compose? So as you said, putting together a pitch is its own separate science. I didn't know that. And so for me, and obviously the guy that I mentioned before that's got the 73 rejections, is that, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you need to learn on how to put together a decent pitch, because you can have a really great concept. You may have a manuscript that's killer, but if your pitch sucks, then no one's going to read the rest. On average, it's called a log line, but you have to condense your book down to one sentence. And you really have to explain in that one sentence in an impactful way why this is a good book. So writing log lines is its own drill. You know, I practice it. All the books that I've got on my hard drive, I practice it for almost every one of them. In fact, the first thing I do when I've gotten to a point, I get these rushes of adrenaline where I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to put this down. And it's a whole concept. Usually it's not half baked. It's like, guy does this, war, you know, the action sequence, I mean, everything. And so I'll write out a whole outline. And then I'll start to fill in some cases, I'll have 3 or 4 chapters that are already fully gelled. And then I go back and say, okay, now what does a log line read? And so distilling everything down into one sentence, that's really hard, especially one sentence that a guy's going to pick up or a gal and is going to look at it and go, holy crap, that's going to be a bestseller. So yeah, there's a lot of art and science to it. And unfortunately, it would be great if authors could just write. But, you know, a lot of times, as you mentioned, you got to promote yourself. And I had my agent told me that. My agent said, Rip, your presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are really bad. I was like, oh, how do you figure? You know, he said, well, here. He just kind of went through a list of stuff. I said, well, you know, in the military, we just, you know, your duty is to be humble. I mean, your men are the ones doing all the work. You're putting plans together and stuff. But he said, Rip, you know, you can go ahead and be humble. And then 90% of your potential readership are going to move on to somebody else. He said, I need you to toot your own horn a little bit. Where did you go? People want to hear about guys that, you know, fought and kicked butt and dropped mortars and, you know, called for close airstrikes. He said, so you got to pizzazz it up. And I said, okay. He looked at the website and said, there's no pictures of you with your uniform. I was like, well, you know, when you're active duty, you can't present the uniform. And he said, but you're retired. So wear all that stuff with a badge of honor and show people that you've been there so that they'll realize you're putting all of your heart and soul into writing books. And so, I don't know, it was a tough thing to do for me. It was a hard transition to say, okay, but I get it. It's like, you know, for me, when I go to a guy's website who's a writer, I immediately want to look at their bona fides. Well, where did it come from? You know, if the guy was, you know, worked in a used clothes store for his whole life, then maybe I'm not interested, you know, because I want to see that he's done some stuff that's interesting, or at least has found a way to get where he's at. So, yeah, that was uncomfortable. That's another piece of advice I give to a lot of would-be writers is, you know, take some time and make sure that people know who you are and where you've been. And don't be afraid to brag a little bit. I mean, people can read through a braggadocio, someone who just is all about themselves and doesn't care about anybody besides tooting their own horn. And frankly, there's no one on the planet that likes that guy, right? But you know, there's, you know, at the same token, if you don't say some stuff about you, at least say, hey, yeah, I deployed 10 times, and you know, although war sucks, I can write about it. So, and my books don't. So there you go.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a lot to be said about this, because one of the things is, and you've mentioned your mentors several times, you know, they have these mentors, spent as much as you want to get published, go find 73 pitches for you to be my mentor. Here's what I offer. Here's what, whatever I do. And find that person who's ahead of you, who's like, yeah, I'll guide you. And then this is important. And I don't know why people don't do this, but listen to what they say, So when they say, here's a dragon that you need to kill, here's how you kill this dragon. So I'm going to say out loud right now, like if you're reading about log lines and everything else that Rip is talking about, read Jeff Calhoun's book on story. And I'll put a link to that in there. But if you don't read this book, then you got to put a professional story together. It's okay to break the rules, but you had better know. It's like with doctrine. You can know the doctrine and then go off of it because you're deployed. But you have to know the doctrine. You have to know the style. And Jeff's book is incredible. And you can sit down and within 3 hours be done with it, and you'll be completely inspired when you read it. And he breaks down exactly how to set up a log line and the different kinds of stories and the element. All of it's there. Read that book. Don't come back to me and you've done that and have mastered what's in that book, because a lot of the stuff you need to know is simply in an $8 book. Can you go read? I'm not going to do that. Well, then I can't be your mentor,
Yeah. Yeah. As a new writer, you don't know it, but you're full of flaws, and the flaws it just depends on who you are as a person, your personality. I still have a tremendous amount of flaws that I have to work through. It's interesting to watch more senior writers. I go to all the writers' conferences. I really enjoy getting around writers. I mean, I'm a huge reader. You can't see all my library back here, but I have one library in my office. I've got another library in our house that's a very large library because both me and my wife read. Obviously, married a gal who likes to read as much as I do, so there's a lot of commonality there. She's a great lady, and she's an avid reader. But when you come to writing the first time, you don't realize what your flaws are. So I go to the writers' conferences because I'm around writers, and there are writers of all different ilk. I go to the International Thriller Writers Conference up in New York every year. I go to BoucherCon, which is a fantastically well-established mystery writers and thriller writers conference. So I've started going to the Imaginarium. There are the conferences where you're around senior writers. I mean, Lee Child comes around to the conferences and is very approachable. We had, I just spaced his name, but wrote the Dragon series that we all loved and watched, Game of Thrones. What the heck's the guy's name? Anyways, he showed up. Diana Gabaldon, who wrote Outlander, she comes to these series, and they don't have a lot of time. Nelson DeMille is very approachable at the writers' conferences. He actually this was an interesting story. He sent me and my unit about 11 boxes of his novels, all signed by him, when I was in combat. And he was an acquaintance of my mom's, and my mom said, "Hey, my son's in combat, and he likes reading books. His kids his Marines all like reading books." And he signed these books and sent them out to us. And I saw him at a conference years later, and I mentioned to him, and he was just overjoyed. I mean, he couldn't have been more overjoyed. And then took 15 minutes to give me some advice and talk to me about writing. Lee Goldberg is another one of my mentors. If you've ever seen Baywatch or the television series Monk, or if you've read his Killer series of books and novels, the guy's a fantastic writer. I mean, who didn't watch Baywatch back in the day, and who doesn't love the series Monk? So Lee Goldberg is another mentor of mine, and I've sat down with him to talk about novel writing and business. Has fantastic business acumen as much as he does, a talent for writing. So yeah, I mean, those are fantastic resources. Go to a conference and learn from some writers. I was gratified to see. I mean, this is my third book, and I've got a fourth on the way. And I was gratified to see at the most recent Imaginarium conference I went to that, I'm not the bottom dude anymore. It's kind of nice to be a guy where people are coming up and going, "Hey, Rip, I love your latest novel." And I'm like, how did you recognize me? I'm still kind of a budding author. I'm like, "Oh, no, I read your stuff." And then they would ask advice, and I was asked to be on some panels. And so, hopefully, as another friend of mine, a mentor of mine named Mark Cameron always tells me, he writes the summer Tom Clancy series. He says, "Rip, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So, take your time and learn along the way." And obviously that guy's a class act. He was a 30-year federal marshal. It's funny because he and a lot of other guys like him, military and former cops, at all of these writers' conferences tend to kind of get together and hang out. And it's always like after hours. So, we found that like every writers' conference by day 2, all of the kind of salty dogs who've been, either behind the badge or in the trench, all get together over kind of a scotch or a beer, and then the war stories come out, which is funny because then all these very highly acclaimed authors come over and they want to listen to our war stories. And it's like drunken war story 101,
This is
maybe very entertaining. So we had one of our buddies who's not military who said, hey, have you guys considered just like, if we just gave you like a case of beer and stuck you on stage to do, a panel for about an hour, would you guys just tell war stories for an hour? And because they're like, we could take some notes as long as you said it's all free. And we're like, yeah, 30 years of war stories. Damn right. We got a lot of good stuff and it's all free. So I don't know. It's fun part of writing is camaraderie.
I love it. And there are these things that these guys just can't know. Like, I always say, like, when someone's like, oh, don't mind my house. It's just, I'm like, you cannot believe that your place is the worst place I ever slept in. I promise you, it is not. Or like when you look around, you're like, I need a spoon to eat this, whatever I have to eat. And all of a sudden, everything's a spoon. They're invisible until you need a spoon. That you're like, I just need to eat this thing. And you're like, there's a spoon right there. And maybe you take your knife and you whittle off a piece of wood or, whatever it is. But these are the things that we come up with that the authors, they just can't know because they haven't, the cold they've ever been has always been while deployed. And the things you do to survive that coldness, they never leave you. Like being cold has a very clear memory, at least for me. And it has to be true. So these things you stick with, you're like, this is how you survive being in a sub-zero atmosphere when you're outside, kind of thing.
It's funny because I'm always talking to my kids about it, and it's hard because, they're 9, 10, and 16. And so for them, having a Marine dad that's got to be hard. I always sometimes I stop and go, while I'm leading the troops, I realize, okay, well, these aren't my troops. These are my kids. So, I have a tendency to blade hand, like, all right, listen up. Here's what we're doing this afternoon. We got 3 duties. That was 2. Good Marine math, by the way. We got 3 duties to accomplish, and the kids are looking at me like, Dad, come on. So, I think, the military guys, you do experience that. And you said cold, and that's evocative because the military doesn't always give you a lot of good equipment. I mean, the Taliban had it worse than we did, thank God. But, the military never gives you a lot of great stuff either. So you experience ups and downs in the military, unlike you do as a civilian. And civilians, I'm going to dime this. I don't know who this young lady is. She's all over YouTube right now for mocking reasons, but she's very much a millennial, probably, 20, 22. And she's crying her eyes out about what's happening in Afghanistan and what the Taliban are going to do. And it's like, oh, here's a young lady who kind of gets the human tragedy because this is unfolding in front of us and it's awful and it's going to get worse. I hate to say it. The stories that leak out even after they shut down Western media, which is coming, I think it's once we're all boots dry out of that country, they're gonna start really whomping some butt. And I'm trying to use metaphors because obviously it's gonna be a lot worse than that. But there's this lady crying her eyes out, and this young gal, and then after in the middle of it, she goes, I'm sorry, but my lips are really. I got this new lip balm. Have anyone tried this? And it's really kind of like glue. And I had to look in my bag to see if I had glue. And I thought, is that glue? And no, it's not glue. It's this new lip balm. So, don't try whatever this lip gloss is. I'm like, oh my gosh. As my Marines used to say, my Marines used to tell me this all the time. And your Marines are always unendingly wise. And one of my troops pulled me aside. He said, hey, sir, we're not at war. And I'm like, Sergeant Jones, what do you mean? We're fighting tooth and nail. This is a bitter fight. He goes, no, sir. No, sir, we're not at war. America's not at war. America's at the mall. The United States Marine Corps is at war. And in some ways that's prophetic because that's what we saw right now is a lot of military men and women telling their leadership that there's a way to close this war out responsibly. And, so I don't know, America hasn't been at war. I think a lot of Americans are waking up to the fact that we're still in Afghanistan. I think some of the latest polls said, there's a large percentage of Americans that just didn't even know or forgot that we were still fighting. And so when this catastrophe happened, they're like, we're still in Afghanistan. So yep. Me and a lot of other guys been 20 plus years. Yeah. So
well, let's just leave. Well, it ain't that simple. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
You want to kick a bunch of people back off into the abyss? Sure. Then we'll just leave. But we don't like that. Okay. Well, then it's not that simple. We're going to have to get this done right. Let's wrap this thing up and really quick. I don't want to get too much into the book because I want people to buy it and everything, but let's talk about Kill Box. Pitch it. Your peers are all come on here and they got to know why your book is comparable or worth buying instead of somebody else's.
Yeah, so hopefully everybody clung on till the end. So they're hearing all sorts of good stories about how to write and what's going on in Afghanistan. So, the fast forwarding the end is hear what's going on. It's fun. Samuel Clemens, who is also known as Mark Twain, wrote that once. He said he loves going to German lectures in German, the German language, because you could come, if you know how the German language works, you can come to the first 5 minutes of an hour-long lecture and hear all the nouns. And then you can leave and go, have a beer downtown, whatever, come back for the last 5 minutes and hear all the verbs. Obviously, he's playing cute with language, but anybody who's tuning in and has waited till the end can hear something about the book. Yeah. So what we've just been talking about is what is it like when war is in another country? What we've forgotten about, as much as the young lady who's worried about lip gloss, the kind of America still at the mall thing, what we've forgotten is what it's like to be occupied, what it's like to be invaded. And unfortunately, we are very vulnerable, and we don't really realize that there are countries that really hate us. It's not hard to figure out who they are. Russia, China, North Korea. We've got a list of enemies. They're all piling on in the Afghan thing. So in the first book of this series, which was called Assault by Fire, the Russians get a hold of some computers that are really good and help them plan. I mean, it's just a tool to help them kind of plan some war games. But one of these plans that kind of this computer spits out says, they're putting in a lot of data, and one of them says, could we ever defeat, the Germans? Could we ever defeat France? What about the United States? So kind of in its, later years, it's been ignored, this computer, for years and years. And you have this crossover where the computer spits out a perfect plan and says, no, it's feasible to invade America. And then you've got a leader who's obviously much like President Putin, who's very much a megalomaniac. And he says, yeah, I like that plan. And the plan's precepts are, there are three things that you need to invade the United States. One, you need to get the United States to denuclearize. Number two, you need the U.S. invested in another foreign war. And three, you need the U.S. at least softening its Second Amendment. And, believe me, I'm not a gun nut, but at the same time, it is figured into Russian war plans, and has been, our Second Amendment, because, I would ask you, everybody owns a gun in the country, or at least a huge percentage. And it's very scary. We've seen this in Afghanistan, Iraq, where gun ownership in Afghanistan, Iraq is allowed. And so anybody can be Taliban if they decide they want to shoot at Americans. So, you're constantly watching your back. So in the book, the first book, that basically happens. The U.S. is employed overseas, as we are now, in a quagmire, in this case against a foreign power. The Second Amendment gets softened by a president who decides, we need to there's a massacre in a daycare, and he says, let's get rid of some of these guns. And then third, Russia says, well, we can trigger number three. If we start to disarm heavily our nuclear arsenal, the U.S. will do the same thing. And so that's what happens. What we always forget in these, because I was the strategic nuclear officer for the Marine Corps, what we always forget is that they have a huge stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons. And those are obviously very effective if you can use them in close range in the United States. So Russia attacks, they invade the United States, and you have these guys up in their hills. And it's kind of a hodgepodge of, your Uncle Jesse, who's got a shotgun, and some Marines. In this case, the main character's name is Tyce Asher. And he's a Marine major who gets his leg blown off in Iraq, and is kind of put on the shelf. The Corps kind of kicks him to the curb, which I hate to say we kind of do. You get a guy who's been egregiously wounded. We have a tendency to say, well, why don't you go do something kind of, a desk job type thing. And it's very disheartening to young men like that. So in this case, our hero, Tyce Asher, has a hard time with it. He's sent to go train reservists in West Virginia and thinks, well, I still got some capacity to serve in me. I still believe in the United States. I'm going to go over there and do some stuff. And then the Russians invade. And so if you've ever watched the movie Red Dawn, I've had a lot of people, I've had a lot of people who said, hey, this is like Red Dawn on steroids. I'm sorry for making the comparison. Like, no, I love that comparison. I love that movie. Yeah. When I was a kid, we all watched it and we all thought, geez, what if? So that's the backdrop. The backdrop is Russia comes in. The front piece, if you will, is you've got this kind of dirty dozen of dudes and dudettes who just decide, hey, we're not going to sit back and let the Russians take over. So in book 2, the one that we're talking about today, in the Kill Box, the Russians have kind of gotten their feet under them. In the first book, the Russians are invading. In the second book, there's still got a lot of places to pacify. There's a lot of military bases. There's a lot of military infrastructure around the United States. And in the second book, the battle's even harder for our guys because Russia has been able to stockpile. In a lot of cases, they're using our stuff. They plopped down on bases that were relatively unoccupied and said, hey, here's some tanks. We'll figure out how to read English. We'll train our guys. We don't need to send all our tanks over here when we can grab them off the shelf. So
I love it.
The book plays out from there. And in this case, there's a couple of very evil Russian people, and they have some plans that are not so nice. And our Tyce Asher and his buddies have to foil these evil Ruskies.
I love it. Get the Kill Box. It's going to be awesome. You guys will love it. I've enjoyed reading through it. I think it's great. I love having you on, talking about all this stuff. And yeah, we talked about the book business, but that stuff's fascinating to people. And you guys definitely should support Rip because he writes good things. But all of these guys who are writing books, I mean, come on, what is it? $15, $12, $20, whatever. This is how you support great art. Go out and do that. Get out of your homes. Go do things that enrich your lives. Go support people who make incredible things for all of us to enjoy. All right, I'm going to turn this thing off here.
Thanks, man.
Oh, thanks, man. Here we go. I'm going to turn this thing off. Stand by.